Welcome to On Par with Maury Povich. Now, today, I'll tell you, we have an incredible episode lined up. It features two iconic voices in sports journalism, Tony Kornheiser, Michael Wilbon. Two legends. And it's more than just Pardon the Interruption co-hosts, because they're longtime friends. They started to work together at the Washington Post 40-some years ago. And they share a unique bond because my father was also a member of the sports staff at the Washington Post. We're going to dive into their friendship, the origins of it, because a lot of people refer to them as the odd couple. Here we go. So, a lot of people think that you're the odd couple.
There's some similarities.
That's right. That's what I don't understand.
For someone who grew up watching Oscar and Felix, there are some similarities. I laugh at it when I watch. It's so funny, Maury. I watched The Odd Couple a couple of nights ago, and I just started laughing out loud because of some of the things. I'm certainly going to identify with Oscar more than Felix.
Really?
But that's just me. Everybody can, sort of take their turn poking at us and figuring out what they see.
So, Tony, are you that fastidious?
I don't know that I'm that fastidious, but I would identify with Felix much more so than Oscar, and I would wait for Wilbon to throw a plate of lasagna into the wall or something like that and say it's garbage. Many years ago, there was somebody who wrote about us. It's got to be 15 years ago, and it was a woman in a weekly newspaper in New Mexico. And she said they are an old married couple, and that's why we love them. And I've always sort of accepted that because our roots on this show go back 20 years before the show.
Right.
That's
what I want to
talk about.
That's what I want to get into.
People talk about having a relationship that you can draw upon because it has great depth. We know what the other one is going to say most of the time.
Oh, really?
Certainly possible.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. The mistake that other people make is they say, we want to have a show like PTI. We're going to put these two people together, and it's just going to happen automatically. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Again, we had 20 years of knowing each other and
Right.
being friends and screaming at each other before the show started. So it was organically done.
All right. So
Maury.
I want to start there, okay? Tony comes to the Washington Post after working at Newsday and the New York Times in 1979. Yep. You had 10 years of journalistic experience at some great newspapers. Michael comes to the Washington Post in 1980 as what, Michael, like an intern?
Yes, absolutely. Graduation on June 13, in Washington, working for George Solomon on June 14.
And so what did you think the first time you ever saw Tony?
You know what? I think it was in the lunchroom, in that lunchroom at the Post on the second floor. And I didn't, back then, there wasn't a national clearinghouse. There's no internet. You don't know others. You don't know writers from other places. You just don't. I knew the writers from my place, from Chicago. I knew Siskel and Ebert. Speaking of people we can be compared to.
And you knew Mike Royko, and you knew about
I knew
him.
Royko. I knew Bob Green, but I didn't. I knew some of Tony's work, but I didn't know him.
Right.
I didn't, so.
How long did it take for you all to get into it next to the water cooler? Did it take years?
Probably months at least.
No, not years.
No, not years.
It's a small staff.
Yeah.
It's a small staff and everybody sort of knows each other. And one of the nice things about the Washington Post was most everybody liked each other. And Mike was very accessible. He's coming out of Northwestern. I'm aware that Northwestern is a really good school. I went to the State University of New York at Binghamton. So if you went to Northwestern, I thought, you must be pretty smart. You must be pretty good. He could write right away. He was collegial right away. And I remember pretty early on making fun of him in the columns that I was writing, just calling him that Toddlin town and offering people the opportunity to meet him or get his clothing or something like that, and he accepted that right away. And I'm not going to say that at that point I knew that X was going to happen 40 years down the road,
Right.
but it was very clear to me that Wilbon was easy to be around, loved sports, loved being a sports writer and journalism, and fit right in with everybody else. That was apparent early on.
So the fit part, Maury, is important that Tony mentions, because the room was that way. The reason why it would never take years, it was, probably a couple of months, even for an intern, is that we had really, really successful people, as you know, in that room at that time. Dave Kindred and Ken Denlinger and Tom Boswell, and your father was still coming in, even though he retired officially the year before I got there. He was still there on many days, and the discussions were amazing. Barry Lorge, and Andy Byer, the discussions were amazing, and you had to be able to take some shit.
Yeah.
And that was, I loved it. I thought that was the greatest room. And I miss it, and I will never walk into anything like that again.
So let's talk about the two of you and my father.
Yeah.
Did he always? This is what I remember. He always was dressed nattily. He would walk in,
100%.
Walk into the
100%.
office, tie, jacket, usually a rep tie,
Hat.
a blue button-down
Hat.
shirt, the
Hat.
fedora,
Fedora.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Fabulous.
would he talk much, or would he just go to his cubicle and start thinking?
My recollection of this is that your dad was very receptive to being talked to. There was no sense of he had his hand out in a pose, the Heisman pose, like don't come near me. No, not at all. And he was always, very often when he was in the office, he was around George. And George Solomon is the most collegial, gregarious sports editor to ever live. And George's door is always open. So if George and Shirley are in there, anybody can come in all of the time. And Shirley was like that. I remember when George said to me, and I didn't start out writing a column, and nobody does unless you're hired to do that. I came in, I was going to write features in the sports section, write features in the style section. And when I started writing the column, George said to me, Shirley thinks, he's not crazy about you. He doesn't think you're all that good. He thinks you're trying to be funny all the time. Why are you trying? And I said, well, he's right. I'm trying to be funny all the time. And then it was about 6 months later that George came to me and said, Shirley's flipped on you. He loves you now. What did you do? And I said, I just wore him down. That's all. I just wore him down.
Yeah. Well,
I was terrified.
He used
of your
to tell
father.
me. He used to tell me all the time about, Tony. He really is pretty funny. I said, okay, fine. I'm glad you like him. But Michael, you have a great story about him when the two of you are traveling to cover your first big fight.
That's
Your
right.
first
Ray
big
Leonard.
boxing fight.
It's Leonard Duran, and Shirley is driving the rental car, and he says, I'm just terrified. I've never been to any big fight. I grew up with my father watching fights, like those of us of a certain age almost all did. And I loved boxing, but I'm going to the first fight, and Ray Leonard's local, and I've been assigned to do something on Ray specifically, but we're in the car, and your father says, you look nervous. And I said, I'm terrified. And I said, it's my first fight. And your father says, well, I remember my first fight. And I'm sort of braced. I'm braced for something with Joe Louis. I might get Marciano. I'm braced for that. And I said, well, Mr. Povich, what is your first fight? And he said, it was the long count fight, Tunney. And I'm like, oh my God. He saw Tunney. He saw Dempsey Tunney, the long count fight. And
in Chicago, 1927.
in Chicago, at I believe that fight was at Soldier Field, not at Wrigley Field. And so in 1927, I know all about the fight. I just don't think I can sit with a human being who was at the damn fight.
Yeah.
And that freaked me out so bad. I wasn't nervous anymore.
And then.
So let me just follow up on that, because Mike and I were both with your father the night that Cal Ripken broke Lou Gehrig's streak.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess this is 1998, maybe in
Correct.
Baltimore.
Correct.
1998.
Six,
Mike and I
96.
are,
96,
we're all there.
96.
We're all writing. We're all going to write at some point, and we're all in the press box together. And the only person in the stadium who was there for Gehrig and was there for Ripken is your dad.
Yeah.
And he's really happy to be there. And at one point, and Mike remembers this well, at one point a foul ball comes flying into the press box. Remember this, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Foul ball comes flying into the press box, and it lands in, at that time, Wilbon's ample midsection. And it pretty much wedges in, on the top of his belt and the rest of his body. And Mike holds on to the ball for a little while, and I say to him, and George says to him, give the ball to Shirley. Give the ball to Shirley. And Mike gives the ball to Shirley. And when we walk out together, your dad, who had to be in his, probably in his 80s at that point.
He was 90.
At that point, he's walking out with us. He's flipping the ball into the air, catching it, flipping it into the air. And I mean, it's the end of the movie, right? I mean, He was there for Gehrig, he's there for Cal, and he's got a ball. It was wonderful.
1941 and 1998. It's really, yeah. And by the way, I think his article on Gehrig's that day at Gehrig, when he said,
luckiest man to face the earth.
His great speech. That article was. It's very interesting. I always he had such great regard for the two of you, and what I liked about it was, Tony, you know this better than I do. His blood brother in sports writing was Red Smith, and you worked for the Times when Red was there, and you always used to have You've done something that nobody else has done, right? When it comes to those two.
I think I'm the only person who ever worked on the same sports staffs as Walter Wesley Red Smith and Shirley Povich, the two greatest writers of all time, greatest sports writers of all time. And I was always proud of that. And I would tell the story that people would look at my work and they would say, you can't even carry their typewriters. And I said, well, in fact, I have. I have carried Red's typewriter up the stairs at Yankee Stadium and carried Shirley's typewriter up the stairs at Memorial Stadium. So I can carry their typewriter.
Right. People don't realize about having to carry your own typewriter to a sporting event. I mean, it's unheard of today, right?
No, there's no such thing as typewriters. No.
Have you two, has there ever come a time over the years that you might have thought, I just don't think I want to do this anymore with this guy?
I have not. I've never had that thought. No, not once.
No. People work together. You find this out all the time. There are these people that work together, and then in X amount of years, usually between 5 and 10, they hate each other. They were sold as people that were really good friends, and they end up hating each other. And each one tells you, I hate him. I can't be around him anymore. No, Mike and I have never had that at all.
Never had that.
Never once.
It never
We've
came.
never had that at all. No, and we talk all the time.
Yeah.
Talk on the phone all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just call up and say, did you see that? And of course he's seen that because he's got 8 TVs. He's seen all of it. So, yeah.
But why do you always tease him about, all the people, he sucks up to and all the celebrities that he knows and all these people he name drops? Why do you?
Because if he dropped these names on his own feet and they weighed like they were concrete, he'd have no legs left. He knows everybody in the world, his text chain and the Hall of Famers that he's around and all of that. And I know who they are, actually, secretly. I know who they are. And I was going to tell him that last night I'm looking at my phone and one of his dearest friends in the world has texted me, and it's Barkley. Charles has texted me because I've said something about the eagle, right? So before the Eagles-Washington game, the Philadelphia fans, there's an eagle. And it flies around the stadium, and I'd never seen it before, and I thought it was totally awesome because it's an eagle, and it lands on a guy's arm, And Barkley hears me say that and texts me immediately saying, "We did this at Auburn before them with the War Eagle. We did it. It's fabulous." And I wondered if Wilbon, did he text you with the same thing? Because later on he said, "Okay, you correct." Wilbon corrected you later in the show.
That's it. Yeah. Maury, you should know this, that while Tony will get on me about name dropping. So the first person who said to me, ESPN wants to do you and Tony do a show and you're thinking about not doing it. You're thinking about saying no. This is stupid and you're going to do it. We're going to go out to dinner right now. I'm going to explain to you why you're going to do this show. That person was Charles Barkley.
Really?
And as a result, when Tony and I said, okay, finally, yes, we're going to do it, I called Charles, and Tony knows this story is true. And I said, okay, Chuck, you were part of the mechanism that got us into this. You got to be the first guest. And he was.
Wow.
The first 5 Good Minutes guest in the history of PTI was Charles Wade Barkley.
So, but there was somebody, as I understand it, who either saw you, the two of you, arguing around the water cooler at the Post sports section.
Yeah, Mark Shapiro, yeah.
And how did he? Why?
He was doing Sports Century at the time, the Sports Century Project, which named the top 100 athletes of the 20th century. Mark Shapiro was young, and I mean young, producer who was in charge of that project. And he would travel all over the place and visit with the panelists who were in charge of selecting those 100.
I see.
Vote.
So he came to the Post and saw the two of you in action.
Several times.
And then
I mean, we had been on, they had the wonderful Sunday morning show, the sports reporters.
The sports reporters, right. I remember.
We had each done, and we never did it together because we wouldn't put two people from the Washington Post on together. I mean, part of the thing was to get geographic, distribution around the country. They'd bring in sometimes people from Los Angeles, certainly often from Chicago and places like that. So Mike and I never did it together, but they had, as they say, tape on us. They had seen us. They had a sense, that we could do this, and they wanted an opinion show, and Mark was in charge of it. And Mark wanted to do it in Washington because the previous opinion shows on television, the political opinion shows, were being done out of Washington. And Mark grew up with that background. I think his father worked for Time magazine or something like that, and he had that kind of background, which is why one of the reasons that they selected us. But I don't know if people know this. So the show starts, whenever the show starts, October, September, it doesn't matter.
What year?
In May.
2001.
2001.
2001.
But in May, Wilbon says to me one day, we're going to do a show for ESPN. I said, what? What are you talking about? He says, I've been talking about it. We're going to do a show for ESPN. We're going to do a daily show. I said, you're out of your mind. You're crazy. What are you talking about? Stop. And then he said, no, we're going to do it. And then as time wound on, 2 or 3 different people called me from ESPN, and they said, would you be interested in doing this? Would you be interested in doing the show? And I mean, originally I thought it was a joke. I mean, I even thought it was a joke when we started. I mean, I just couldn't imagine that people who looked like us were going to be on television for more than, I don't know, a week and a half or something.
So now, as I understand it, I mean, there are rumors out there, you two, that this show sometime in the summer is going to be extended from 30 minutes to an hour. If I was doing a half-hour show for 24 years and then somebody said it's going to be an hour, I would say, I just don't know whether this is going to be good. I mean, string it out for an hour. I mean, we're good for 30 minutes. I mean, won't people get tired of us after an hour? Are you guys worried about that?
Tony, you go first.
Okay. My official position on this is that the show that we have done is really wonderful. I enjoy it very much. And so that any change to a show, I feel sort of like you are suggesting. You go, really? Why? How's it going to work? But, if ESPN, to my, I don't know if this is true with Mike, but I know it's true with me. To this point, nobody has said to me officially, we would like to do an hour, and here is a contract offer, and here is something that's going on. So I'm going to just be a little bit coquettish, and I'm going to wait for someone to say to me officially, this is what we want to do and this is what we are prepared to do as a result.
Would you be on board with this, Mike?
Well, amen to what Tony just said. I feel a little bit differently at this point, Maury. I felt the exact same way, word for word, that Tony has expressed just now. I felt that way for the entire run of the show, but two things have changed. One, the sports calendar is so different now than it was 24 years ago when we started this. There's so much stuff. There's stories, are huge stories we don't get to because we don't have enough time. And there wasn't that demand. There wasn't that strain of stories. And I'm not talking about July, August, which are weak anyway. I'm talking about even football. There's stuff we don't get to. We can't. We get to Jimmy Butler yesterday for 10 seconds. That's a legit story that could have been done for 2.5 minutes. Because each sport has decided to be in your life and dominate your life 300 days a year. And because of that, it strings out. There are more stories or perceived. And this is where Tony and I have different lives to some degree. I've been doing the NBA now at the network for 20 years, but over the last 10, there are 2 and 3 nights a week in which I am doing NBA live television.
I know.
And some nights an hour and a half.
And you're there, which means you're traveling all over the place.
But what that does is the half an hour doesn't seem daunting to me anymore.
Okay. All right.
Because I'm doing, sometimes 90 minutes between Sports Centers, ABC, and ESPN live basketball. I'm doing sometimes an hour plus, sometimes 90 minutes, at 3 nights a week, or 2 nights a week. So an hour doesn't faze me anymore. Whereas 15 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, I just don't want to try to fill that. Now I just think that's not all that much time.
So it's bad for me because it cuts into my nap time. I'm so old. By the way, right now, this is the oldest podcast ever made in America between the three of us. And it's a significant problem for me. If you go an extra 30 minutes, I got a nap. I don't know if I can.
Look, I got to end on this. And I applaud you because of the way you've been able to be enthusiastic about sports all these years. So I started as a sportscaster in Washington. And I did a talk show named Panorama, and I anchored the weekend news, but I also was the sportscaster. And I loved doing sports. And, of course, my father, obviously, I learned at his knee. So it's now the 1970s. George Allen is the coach. It's around, I think it's the year after they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Dolphins in 1973. And I'm still doing sports. And I'm in the locker room one day, and I asked George Allen, I see this bottle of pills. Now, in the 1970s, everybody was saying everybody was hopped up, everybody was taking drugs and everything else. And I'm looking at this bottle of pills. It could have been salt pills, who knows? And I say to George Allen, I said, Coach, can you tell me what's in that bottle? And he looks at me, and he says, Maury, are you with us or against us? And I said to myself, I got to get out of sports.
Get out.
I can't do it anymore. If I need a loyalty test, I got to get out. You guys have had to deal with people like this all your lives. So how come you still sound great and optimistic about covering sports, and I just chucked it in 1973?
Because sports is, I know I can speak for Mike when I say this, sports is the great leveler. Sports is about merit. All the people on all the teams can say, are you for us or against us? You can do all that. But we're pretty much art critics at this point. When you start writing a column and you're not covering day to day, when you're getting paid because of your particular opinion, your particular insight, you are not weighed down by all of that stuff that beat writers are weighed down by. It's really tough to be
By the
a beat
way,
writer.
were you ever, now, both of you have been beat writers before. Were you ever faced with something like that?
Every day,
everybody
they want you to be with them. They want you to be with them, and not
everybody's faced with that.
Yeah,
sure. Everybody gets that all the time. If you cover a team, it's just assumed by people on the team that you are for them all the time and will protect them. And when you don't, because you're doing your job, they are wounded and they get angry and hostile and they get threatening. And that's all part of the job. And if you injected Wilbon and me with truth serum and you said, what's the biggest difference now between what you do and what these other people on television do? It's that they never went through that, Maury. They never were in that cauldron. They never surveyed that battlefield. They never began to understand the sort of politics that goes on when you cover a team. They've just sat around and had opinions. And it's right, Mike, it's just so complete. Our training is so different, and it stays with us to this day. And that's why I think we can really like every event that's in front of us.
Well, Maury, keep in mind, what industry isn't like that? I mean, that's not unique. What you described is certainly accurate, but it's not unique to sports. I don't find any.
You think it's that way in politics? You think it's that way in politics?
Oh God, it's even worse in politics, and even in sort of academic life. I'm a trustee at a university where I can't believe how people have to line up behind things. And Tony and I are contrarians, and I don't line up behind anything. But he's absolutely right. Look, I still do it. That's why I still go. Last week, I went to the 76ers Knicks game. And I went to the locker room to talk to people that I might have been critical of, like the Sixers and the malaise they have right now. And what I have found, Tony, because I know because Tony's not doing that anymore, is that the people who know we did that, they're actually, Maury, happy that we have come in to do that because nobody else does. They don't see people. So I walk in, I actually had the older players, and it's the older guys, stand up. And even before they would say, you were crazy, you were nuts last week to say that, there's a hug and a recognition of this guy actually comes in, and trainers, coaches, people who are old enough to remember the first iteration of our careers, our lives. So sports, you can still sit down with those coaches. You're not going to sit down, Tony mentioned art critic, you're not going to sit down with actors after you rip them for a new movie that has just come out. You're not going to sit down with the director or the producers. You're not going to sit down, maybe you sit down with the politicians, maybe you don't. But what industry is there where the most famous people in the world, in their underwear, are led to a place or doors are open where they entertain you and your ideas?
That's pretty good.
The most famous, your father introduced us to that when your father would say, and we had to coax it out of him, Ruth told me.
Right.
Oh, it was better when he referred to
wasn't talking
Walter
about
Johnson.
Ruth Westheimer. Ruth told me.
Yes, we all knew who Babe Ruth was. You understand? And you shook Babe Ruth's hand, you knew whose presence you were in. This is true. On the other hand, let us say that Babe himself, when he shook your hand, wasn't really aware of who exactly you might be.
When he referred to Walter Johnson, he would say, I was talking to Train. And Train said, I went, what?
Come on.
What?
Come on,
Boy.
Everybody wants you to line up with them, or it doesn't matter. If we paid attention to that, hell, I'd be homeless. There'd be no industry to work in.
Guys, I want to thank you. It's just been a joy.
I want you to see something, Maury, before you go anywhere. You can see what's in my right hand.
Look at that. Oh, boy.
Right here.
Tony had that thing in back of his little studio for weeks
Connie,
on
is it the book?
PTI.
Yes, Connie.
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate
Thanks,
it
Maury.
so much.
Thanks, Maury.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening to On Par with me, Maury Povich. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at OnParPod for behind-the-scenes content and updates. And don't forget, you can catch the full episodes on YouTube and everywhere you listen to podcasts. And remember, always keep the conversation going. Stay curious. It'll keep you young. We'll see you next time.
On Par with Maury Povich is brought to you by Mopo Productions, A Better Life Media, and Radley Studios. Executive produced by Maury Povich, Holly J. Mirabella, Christian Thompson, and supervising producer Mike Bornasian.